Greetings! In my current course at the Norwest School of Horology, the project is to buy a manual wind vintage watch, clean it, and regulate it. The watch shouldn't be in need of any repair. It should just need a decent cleaning and regulation. So on eBay, I bought a Gruen watch dating to the early 1960s. It was advertised as running and recently serviced, running well, and not in need of any repair. Its movement is a Gruen 510 RSS. This is a highly respected vintage movement. It stood the test of time and it perfectly fit the bill. So I cleaned it, reassembled it, and ultimately put it on the Timegrapher. I thought this would go smoothly and I'd be quickly done with the project. After all, the watch didn't need any servicing, right? Well, here's what the Timegrapher displayed. A beginner watchmaker usually zooms in on the top row. After setting a lift angle, we want to minimize the beat error, confirm the amplitude is within acceptable limits, and adjust the rate. So it's natural to focus at first on the top row's values. But when I looked at the traces in the bottom section, I quickly realized that something was very wrong with this movement. It would be possible to achieve good top row numbers, but still have a very sick watch that would ultimately fail at some future time. The first thing to note is the inconsistent tick and tock traces. The lower one is a normalish looking line, and the upper one is a random snow pattern. This particular trace type is in fact called out in the vibrograph documentation. It indicates something is seriously amiss with the escapement, pallet stones, and/or roller jewel. So that was defect number one, and it was heckin' serious. But I had another problem that was just as serious. The rate was all over the place. I'm showing only one photograph here, but it was up and then down and then back up again for irregular intervals, for irregular amounts of time, and for irregular deltas. A few things could cause this. For example, excessive side shake somewhere, a pivot problem, or an arbor problem. So I went back to square one. I disassembled and cleaned every part again and carefully evaluated every part. Now, truthfully, I evaluated each one more carefully than I did on disassembly. And I learned a lesson, which actually I had learned in a previous bit of watch work, and now this really drove it home, that I need to scrutinize parts much more closely when I do a disassembly than I have been doing. It is not enough to do a quick scan using your 3x or 4x loop. You look at it, you don't see anything obviously busted, and you say, hey, this looks fine. You've got to scrutinize every part, every pivot, every jewel. Anyway, I closely examined each part under the microscope at up to 45x magnification. The gear teeth and pinion leaves all looked fine. The jewel holes looked fine. The escape wheel and its teeth looked fine, and I really scrutinized those quite a bit because they had been called out in the documentation of the trace problem. But by the examination's end, I had found 3 problems that should have been caught during disassembly, and I am embarrassed that I hadn't caught them. Problem number 1 is the mainspring barrel has a little side shake. The historical evidence was evident under the barrel bridge. There was some brassing. This is the best photo I could take, but you'll notice there was some gold color where the top of the barrel sometimes had rubbed on the underside of the barrel bridge during rotation. And that's the brass showing through underneath the worn away plating from years of rubbing. Also, I could wiggle the barrel a tiny bit. Problem number 2 is I found small chips and defects on the edges, on the corners of the pallet stones. Now, it wasn't clear to me how much impact these would have since they're all on the edges. It wasn't like a chunk was taken out of a face or, a stone was broken, but just little nicks on the corners of the stones. But they are undeniably defects. 3, and this is the big one, the fourth wheel has a bent pivot. My course instructor and I judge this to be the largest problem and the first one to fix. Of course, I hope that fixing it would solve all of the Timegrapher symptoms, but even if not, fixing it would eliminate some of the symptoms and allow other problems to be more clearly visualized. It turns out that straightening a pivot is not for the faint of heart. This is the first time in my watchmaker education where I heard, yeah, don't even try it. Up until now, there's always been some tool or technique that, while a challenge to master, would do the trick. Not so with pivot straightening. Sites sells the 30350 pivot straightener. I had 3 people within the space of 1 week tell me the same joke, that it should actually be called the pivot breaker. The conventional wisdom is that it's a great idea that is so hard to use correctly that it's not worth even trying. I should note that my friend Mark from Australia pointed out that the 30350 has joules in 1/4 of a hundredth of a millimeter increments, i.e. 0.0025 millimeters, which can be very helpful when measuring pivots. Anyway, long story short, straightening a bent pivot is fraught with peril, and I elected to replace the fourth wheel rather than fix it. So I purchased a used fourth wheel from Scotchwatch.com. I've bought from them before and recommend them for your watch part needs. No, I'm not being compensated for saying that. The wheel arrived. I reassembled and re-lubricated the movement. So the only substantial difference was the improved fourth wheel. Here's what the Timegrapher displayed. I recorded this video over about a month of time, and so I've taken an additional step over what you just heard. After I replaced the fourth wheel, I still saw some snow evident on the trace lines. So I also replaced the pallet fork with one from a donor movement. Replacing the pallet jewels on the existing fork would have been a good learning experience, but I had the donor movement handy and I decided to be expedient. The dial down results you see here are after I replaced the fourth wheel and the pallet fork. The trace lines look great. Everything looks normal. The beat error is wonderful. The amplitude is acceptable, I think, for a 65-year-old watch. I could tighten up the rate a bit, sure. So, hooray, right? I'm done, right? Well, after taking a full set of timing results, I discovered the next problem for me to solve. The dial up and dial down results are markedly different. So let's just ignore the crown results for the moment and just look at dial up and dial down. They ought to be close because in both positions, the wheels and balance are resting upon and using only one pivot. The crown positions are expected to have more power loss because both pivots are being used and they're being used on their sides. But the dial up and dial down positions incur mostly single pivot friction. Very slightly different values would be okay. But here there's a difference of 22 seconds a day and 33 degrees of amplitude. That's a lot. And also note that the crown test amplitudes, even though I'm not looking or focusing on the crown test results right now, the crown test amplitudes are lackluster and nothing to write home about. So what could cause these results? Well, on one of the wheels, one pivot is dirtier or has less lubrication than the other, or more or less side shake or end shake than the other. Or one pivot has some rough spots. Or on the balance, one of the pivots has a flat end. Or there's a bad joule somewhere. Or the hairspring is rubbing slightly in the dial-up position. Or maybe the regulator pins aren't true. Or the banking pins aren't perpendicular to the plate. I already suspected that I had a small problem with the mainspring arbor's side shake. I talked about that in the original video. Maybe it's significant enough to be causing these results. So I'm going to decide whether to fix the arbor side shake in the next few days. And I will definitely look at the pivots. I'm leaning toward leaving the center through fourth wheels alone and focusing, for now, at first, on the escape wheel, the pallet fork, and the balance assembly. So, the big news of the day is I'm not done with this project yet. And that's all I have for you today. Till next time, take care.